14. ¡Vamos! Sí me gusta. Ahora sí, tenemos a una verdadera eminencia de la industria de los videojuegos. Lo trajimos porque pues no sé qué está pasando con las aventuras gráficas en la Argentina, pero cada vez están haciendo más aventuras, lo cual me encanta, por supuesto. Y es para mí un tremendo agrado presentarles a esta persona que ha trabajado en empresas de la talla de Infocom, Legend Entertainment y por supuesto Sierra Online. Lo tenemos, por favor, un aplauso muy grande a Josh Mandel.
Thank you. I just want to start off by thanking Augustine and all the organizers, Miguel, for having me out here, because this is a very special day for me. I was at Sierra 25 years ago. I was 32 years old. And I never dreamed that 25 years later, I would be standing in front of a whole audience of people. I've never done this before. Standing in front of a whole audience of people talking about my experiences there on another continent continent I've never been to. This is all very new to me and very special, because when I was at Sierra, I was doing the same thing everyone else was doing, which was sitting down and doing the best we could. You know, I would sit down every day and I would write. That was my big thing there. They would they had me as a producer sometimes, they had me as a designer, but I was happiest when I was just sitting writing text and dialogue and coming up with puzzles. And what was I doing? Well, every day I was just doing the best I could. And if anyone had told me, 25 years from now, you're going to be talking about it. 25 years from now, there are going to be people who are still playing those games. I mean, when you make these games, you don't know if anyone's going to be playing them 6 months from now. You know, back then, the shelf life of a game was about 3 months. Your game hit the shelves, and about 3 months later, it would be replaced with something else. And you didn't know if you were ever going to sell another copy. I certainly never anticipated that we'd still be talking about these games so far in the future, and that these games would still be meaningful to people, still touching them, influencing them in some way, maybe teaching them English, which they used to do back when we had a parser, and I'm not going to get into that because I'm going to get pissed. But these games touch people in all kinds of ways, and they've inspired people. They've inspired thousands of people, and that wasn't the goal. The goal was to create a fun game, and if it sold for 3 months and maybe even sold enough copies to warrant a sequel, that was a big success. The idea that you'd still be playing them and that they would have meaning to you in some way, it just blows me away. And this is the first time I've ever had to talk about it. So when I say I'm honored to be here today, I really mean it. I'm sorry, it's a little hot up here. There's a few lights, I'm not used to it. So, how did I end up coming to Sierra in the first place? Is my fly open? You know, there's a lot of people who told me I was taking my life in my hands with this little gag. Pardon? I actually, of course, rooted for Argentina, so don't take this seriously. I don't. So, anyway, working at Sierra was my dream come true. But I didn't start off as a gamer in any way. I was a comedian. I grew up in a family on the outskirts of show business. My father is a playwright, a TV writer. He's done some movies with directors like Robert Altman and Frank Schaffner, who directed Planet of the Apes, the original Planet of the Apes. So every once in a while I got to rub elbows with actors and performers of various sorts, and I wanted nothing more than to be an actor or a performer in some way. And I was a little kid. I got picked on a lot. And so I developed a sense of humor as a defense mechanism. You know, someone would pick on me and I would just make fun of them because I couldn't hit. So I just wanted to be an actor. So after college, and I went to college as a theater major, after college I became a comedian. I moved to Chicago. I wanted to get into Second City, which has been a little theatrical incubator for all sorts of comics and actors, and I developed a comedy routine. I want to back up a little bit. This is Half Dome. Half Dome appears in every Sierra Online logo that's ever existed, and I just want to echo the words of Roberta Williams, who said, "An adventure game tells a story, is a game that tells a story and looks and sounds beautiful." So, here's her first game. I'm not here to make fun of Roberta or anything like that. I understand what she meant. She meant something closer to this. So, Ken and Roberta, when they were very young and were just starting online systems in their garage. Anyway, let me go through this a little bit. When you think of Sierra, you probably think of Ken and Roberta. You probably think of this gentleman, Al Lowe, not realizing I was going to take a picture of him. You probably think of Scott and Mark, the two guys from Andromeda, here in their heyday. And I don't know what adventure games would look like without them. Probably not like this. So, anyway, I was an actor, and I had some experience with commercials. In fact, let's see if this will run. Are we getting video? Do we get video on this? No? All right. This is a Dungeons and Dragons commercial from the 1980s. I was in the first Dungeons and Dragons commercial. I was the dungeon master. But my comedy routine looked more like this. That is me with my legs behind my neck because I would do anything for a joke. After about, well, close to 10 years of doing this act with my partner, she said, "I'm quitting." And I said, "Why?" "We just got our first audition with Star Search. We're doing great. We have headlined at almost every comedy club in the country. Why are you quitting now?" Well, it turned out that she was pregnant. And she was married, you know, she had, not to me, she had a husband. That wasn't me. And she said, "I can't go to the clubs anymore," because this was in the late 80s, and back then, at least in the United States, there was no regulation as far as smoking, and she was not willing to spend her nights in smoky clubs anymore once she got about 3 or 4 months pregnant. So she quit, and suddenly I was without an act. And I did a little acting, but mostly I threw myself into gaming. I went on to CompuServe. Does anyone remember CompuServe? Anyone actually? Oh, 2 people. Oh, no. All right. We got like a dozen people here who remember CompuServe. It looked something like this. and I became a sysop. I don't know if you know what a sysop is. It's short for system operator, and it's basically a moderator. And I was a moderator in the games forum. And so I deeply involved in talking about games, playing games, and then I started writing about games. I started writing walkthroughs for various games, including Leisure Suit Larry. In fact, if you go online and you search well enough, you will find an old ASCII text walkthrough of Leisure Suit Larry 1 that I wrote. And to me, that was great. And the more I wrote for the Electronic Gamer, which was CompuServe's online gaming magazine, the more they would send me free games. So I got my fix without having to pay for it. I got to play all the games I want, write reviews of them. That was the only payment, really. And I really got off on it. Excuse me. So then I expanded. I started writing for games magazines. There was this old magazine, Video Games and Computer Entertainment, that I wrote for a long time, doing reviews, and a few other magazines too. This was one of the few magazines that appealed to adults. Most of them were pretty splashy and trashy and dumbed down. This was the one magazine that really didn't dumb down its content. So after I had been on CompuServe for a while, I found out that one of the better members, one of the members who spoke up a lot, actually worked at Sierra Online. His name was Garuka Singh Khalsa. And in fact, if you look at almost any of the games that came out between, maybe 1988 and 1994, you will see Garuka listed as producer, unless you see me. Garuka said to me, yes, we'd be happy to try you out as a beta tester. So I started beta testing, and I beta tested for Sierra Online and for a company called Infocom, which was text adventures, and a company called Surtech, which did us a few text adventures, but mostly a series called Wizardry. It was a computer RPG. You remember Wizardry? At the time, that was one of the most popular series. But in fact, there were 8 Wizardries. They were so popular. You're still playing? Yeah, well, the fourth one is really hard. The one where, yeah. So he said, yeah, you can beta test for me. So I started getting Sierra games. What could be better for a game fan than getting Sierra games for free before anyone else had a chance to play them, and to maybe even have some kind of influence on the development? They have the same thing now, only they make you pay for it. But back then, that was my way. No disrespect meant to Kickstarter. Although, frankly, having done it once, I never want to do it again. So, I beta tested for Sierra quite a few games, and it was a wonderful experience. First of all, for all the reasons I mentioned, what an advantage, but also because I found the whole process fascinating. One day I was beta testing on a game called Codename Iceman. Codename Iceman, I see a few heads nodding yes. Codename Iceman was by Jim Walls, who also designed the Police Quest series. Codename Iceman was a spy game. You had to pilot a submarine, and Sierra's programming language, SCI, was not up to doing submarine simulation. It was a mess. It came out a mess, and I was one of the beta testers. But one day I found a crash bug in it, and they couldn't duplicate it. And I reported it, and they couldn't duplicate it. So I got a call from Mark Hood, who was one of the lead programmers there and had been there since almost the very start. And he said, we can't duplicate this at home. And I said, well, I could send you a save game. He said, no, that's not going to work. He said, what we're going to have to do is play the game together over the phone from the beginning. And I was happy to do it. I was thrilled. Someone from Sierra called me on the phone. I mean, wow. And I could help. I could be of assistance. And I was really throwing myself into the beta testing. I loved beta testing, and I treated it like it was a full-time job. And what I didn't do is I didn't give them reams of information, thinking that that was going to be helpful, because it wouldn't have been. They got their own jobs. They don't want to read reams of information. They want the information that they need, and only that, and they need it in the format that they want it. So I found out, what format do you want it? How detailed do you want me to get? I asked all these questions, and I really put as much effort as I would into any full-time job into beta testing for them, much to the consternation of the people for whom I was working in my full-time job. But I stayed on the phone with Mark Hood that day for about 5.5 hours, getting to the point in the game where I would have the crash bug. And I got to that point in the game, and I said, boom, that's where it crashed. And he said, and I felt so good. I had helped him. So, beta testing was a wonderful experience, and eventually Garuka called me and said, look, I am producing every game at Sierra Online. We are ramping up production like you wouldn't believe. We are thinking about purchasing this company, which I found out after I went to Sierra was Dynamics. We are producing all these games, and I am the only producer here. Do you want to be considered as a junior producer? And I thought, there's no way in hell I want to do that job. What a thankless job to be a game producer. I don't know if any of you are producers out here, but it is the most thankless job in this industry. Balancing budgets and egos and expectations and being a diplomat and being a manager. I didn't want any part of it. And I didn't say that to him because, you know, my brain was still functioning at that time of my life. I said, sure. So he flew me out there for an interview. And I can't tell you how absolutely amazed I was when I got there. For instance, I pull up outside the building and I'm hyperventilating. I'm actually at Sierra Online. Holy cow. And the front door opens, and this tall guy comes out, and he looks vaguely familiar. And he comes up to me, he says, hi, you're Josh. I'm Ken. And I'm like, I'm not worthy. I can't touch your hand. Really? Can I? Everyone was so nice, and I met a whole lot of people, and when I saw what was there in development, when I saw for the first time screenshots from King's Quest V and Space Quest IV, I was like, oh my God, I've got to quit my job and get out here. Now, I didn't want to be a producer. I wanted to be a designer. Because I had been playing Sierra games for years, and I had played Leisure Suit Larry 1. And it was a comedy. And I sat and looked at it, and I have never said this to Al Lowe, but I looked at it and I said, I can do better than this. I can make a funnier game than this one. Because what those early games didn't have, for instance, was timing. Comedy requires timing. And there were a lot of jokes in Leisure Suit Larry, and it was a very funny game, but I thought, no, you can go a step farther. You can take the comedy farther with this. So I wanted to be a designer, but it was a foot in the door. So I took the foot in the door. And within 9 months, I was head of the product design department. And it says less about me than it says about how tumultuous the place was and the speed with which the company was changing. I mean, they hired me as a junior producer. I started on King's Quest I SCI, a project that had been languishing for over a year and had not come out yet. We were remaking King's Quest I in the new engine, SCI. The previous engine had been AGI, and SCI had much better resolution. So I got to meet Roberta and work on that. That was my first assignment. Produce King's Quest I SCI and get it out the door already. So I did, but I said to Roberta, by the way, the text for this game, it's kind of sparse. Back in those days, it had to be a two-word command in King's Quest I AGI, a two-word command, and the responses were similarly brief. And I said, you know, if we kind of plumped up the text a little bit and maybe illuminated the game with the text, and she said, do whatever you like. And I was like, great! And I rewrote the text and dialogue for the whole game. I was happy to do it. I wanted to show them that I could write. And she only made 2 changes in all the text that I wrote. I mean, she wanted final say, which of course was the logical thing to do. But she only made 2 changes, and one of them was at the very end. King Edward, I think his name is, dies, and Sir Graham becomes King Graham, and one of the treasures he's found was a mirror, a magic mirror. And we knew now, because we had already done King's Quest II and King's Quest III and King's Quest IV, that mirror was going to end up on the wall of the throne room. So I wrote this line where, with King Edward's dying breath, he said, I think the mirror would look nicest over there. And Roberta said, I don't think his dying words are going to be interior design tips. And I said, I wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. She was touching almost nothing that I wrote. And I said, I just want to point out that he doesn't know those are his dying words. He wasn't planning on dying after saying them. But, you know, it's your decision. And she said, yeah, I think we'll leave it out. And I said, okay. So, but all in all, it was a great experience. And at the same time, I went to all the other designers. And I said, if you happen to need anything written in terms of dialogue, click messages, I forget what we called them back then, I think it was click events, I would be happy to try to write some text for you. And if you don't like it, you don't have to use it. But if you like it, you can put it in the game. And almost everyone declined, except Roberta and Scott and Mark for their work on Space Quest IV, because they wanted a lot of text. So in my spare time, while I was producing King's Quest I SCI and Zelyard and a whole lot of other games, I also did all this writing. And for Space Quest IV, I wrote the software bin, where there are parodies of other games that were hot at the time. For instance, Loom, Brian Moriarty's game Loom, was pretty hot at the time. So we created one called Boom that was like no interface, no plot, no text, no dialogue, no nothing. It's the easiest adventure game to play ever. So I wrote for them, and I wrote a little bit for Christy Marks, just a very little bit, because Christy Marks, who did the Conquests of Camelot and the Conquests series, she had enough drive and pride in her own work. She really didn't want to farm it out. Corey and Laurie Cole did not want to farm out their work. But some of the other designers were perfectly open to seeing what I could come up with and see if it would enhance their games. And so that was my foot in the door. But the other foot in the door came when I was able to synthesize the comedy act
with Sierra, and that happened about 8 months after I got there. It was time for the Christmas party, the annual Christmas party. And they said, well, we usually have entertainment at the Christmas party. What are we going to have this year? And I said, well, if you want, you can fly my comedy partner out, and we can do our little act for you. And they said, oh, that would be nice. Let's do that. So that's what they did. They brought my comedy partner out. We hadn't done a show at that point in about 4 years. And we rehearsed for a couple of days before the Christmas party, and then we did the Christmas party. And they weren't expecting a highly polished 1-hour act that had played at the comedy clubs in LA, in New York. They probably thought we were going to do some little jokey thing. I don't know what they were expecting. But we gave them a good show. And Ken came backstage afterwards and he said, you know what? You shouldn't be producing. You're an entertaining kind of guy. You can write these games. And I said, okay. I'm okay with that. And a few weeks later, I started on Freddy Farkas, and so from there on, it was all a career move that I hadn't expected. So that's how I got started at Sierra, and that's how I got started designing at Sierra. It's not your usual career path, but maybe it'll be helpful to someone somewhere along the way. I want to talk about some of the other people at Sierra who were important that you may not know about. I mean, you know about the big name designers, you know about Corey and Laurie, Scott and Mark, Jane Jensen, all of these people, but there were other people who were there at least as long and had at least as much influence on the games as the people whose names you already know. So I've mentioned Garuka, and the thing with Garuka is that, well, his office was like a pool of calm. I mean, people would go to his office to say, Garuka, I'm so frustrated with this, I'm so frustrated with that, and he would say, here, let me give you a massage. Let's find your center. But he also had a wonderful game sensibility, and a lot of the designers leaned on him very heavily for help when it came to designing games. So, and he did not have an easy time there. Oakhurst, California, where Sierra was located at the time, is a very small town. Just not even, I think, when I was there anyway, not even 1,000 people. It was 50 miles from the nearest city of any size at all, in a little valley about 20 miles south of the southern gate of Yosemite National Park, which I'll talk about in a bit. And Garuka was a Sikh. He came into town wearing a turban. The people in Oakhurst did not know what to make of this. He got stopped by the police on more than one occasion. What are you doing here, sir? This very small town thought going on at Sierra all the time, because a lot of the people who worked there were not there to work on games. They were there because Sierra happened to be the largest employer in town. So they would do anything that was asked of them, because there was really only one other employer of any size in town, and they weren't excited about games. They weren't there to make history. They weren't there to entertain. They were just there because it was a job. So, for instance, some of them would not work on an Al Lowe game. They would not touch a Leisure Suit Larry game. Why? Because it's filthy. Of course, if you played Leisure Suit Larry, you know there's nothing filthy about it. It's just it was almost like a marketing gimmick. You know, oh, there's a lot of salacious material in this game. You're going to be shocked. Hide the children. There really wasn't much in there, but we had people who would refuse to work. There was an artist I wanted to work on Freddy Farkas. She said, no. I said, why not? She said, it's an Al Lowe game. It's going to be dirty. I said, no. I worked on the design with him. It's not dirty. There's no dirt in it. She said, no. There were other people who wouldn't work on Quest for Glory games, previously Heroes Quest. They wouldn't work on them. Why? Because black magic. There was black magic. It was anti-Christian. They weren't going to go anywhere near it. So it became a regular thing. When a new game was starting up, you had to make lists of who would refuse to work on the game and who wouldn't refuse to work on the game. We had the same thing many years later when Jim Walls left Sierra, and the Police Quest series was turned over to, the person sort of in charge of it was Daryl Gates. Daryl Gates, Police Quest 4, and I think 5 too, perhaps, or SWAT 1. Daryl Gates was associated with them. Daryl Gates was chief of police in Los Angeles County at the time that the Rodney King beatings went on. It was a very big thing. And there were a lot of people, and the Rodney King thing was a race issue, and it was a police versus the public issue. It was a huge divisive issue throughout the country. And there were a lot of people who would not work on a game with Daryl Gates on it. And there were people who were proud to work on a game with Daryl Gates, name on the box, but for everyone else they started calling it Rodney King's Quest. Very divisive. So anyway, Garuka did not have an easy time of it in Oakhurst. Another person who was at Sierra for many, many years was the creative director. His name is Bill Davis. Now, this picture and the way that it's formatted here, unfortunately, make it look like he's dead. He's not dead. He's still alive and actually still working in the industry. But he brought something to Sierra that Sierra never had. I'll tell you a bit about where he came from. There was a show in the late 60s and the early 70s, a TV show called Laugh-In. Has anyone ever heard of it? No one's heard of Laugh-In. Laugh-In was, at the time, very raucous, and people in America had never seen anything like it before. They told political jokes, which you couldn't do on American TV. In fact, Richard Nixon, the president, made a brief appearance on this show. They told sexy jokes. That was not done on American television. American television still had, if you saw people's bedroom, like a couple's bedroom, the husband and wife still had separate beds. That didn't change until mid-70s. So Rowan Martin's Laugh-In was before its time, really. If you go back and you see it now, because they brought some episodes out on DVD, it's really corny and awful. But at the time, you felt deliciously dirty just watching it. And they had a go-go dancer on Laugh-In. They hired a go-go dancer. Her name was Goldie Hawn. Does anyone know who Goldie Hawn is? Good. American film star, almost always plays ditzy blondes. She was hired on Laugh-In to dance with all kinds of little graffiti painted all over her. And there is Goldie, and there is some of the graffiti from Laugh-In. She also, by the way, is still alive. And who do you think painted the graffiti on Goldie Hawn when he was a young man? Well, it was Bill Davis. He went on to much bigger and better things. He won an Emmy Award years later for his work on The Tonight Show, which was an institution on American television for a long, long time. He designed these screens that said "More to Come," and they would play before the commercials. And he won an Emmy Award for the quality of those screens, some of which he sold on eBay. So I should have grabbed one while I could. So he painted Goldie Hawn on Laugh-In, as well as Andy Hoyos. Andy Hoyos also painted Goldie Hawn on Laugh-In and also came to work for Sierra. I don't think it was a coincidence. He was one of the art directors, one of the main art directors at Sierra. In fact, when you see the beautiful artwork in King's Quest V, that was Andy Hoyos' work. Andy Hoyos worked at Sierra for years and years, and just did astonishing work. And he was a very fun guy, too. I shared an office with him for a while. And he's alive. So
Bill Davis did something at Sierra that had never been done before. He tried to give it a cohesive look. He wanted Sierra games to have their own definitive look. So he came up with this kind of jaunty, weird angled look that started to get filtered into lots of Sierra games. This is Jones in the Fast Lane, which was it wasn't an adventure, it was a board game. And that's Jones, that guy. That gentleman is Bill Skirvin. He was one of the artists. We used ourselves constantly in these games because it was cheaper than hiring actors, and there were none in Oakhurst. There was another game we put out called Oil's Well, and you can see, again, this is very classic Bill Davis art style. You can see it in Larry 5. This was Larry 5, and Larry has a very different look here than he had in any of the previous Leisure Suit Larry games. The remake of Larry 1, which was actually the second remake of Soft Porn Adventure. And again, you can see the weird, the jaunty angles and it's a very definitive look. We had a designer, Lorelei Shannon, who did a marvelous children's adventure called Pepper's Adventures in Time. This is a screen from Pepper's Adventures in Time. One of the things that Pepper's Adventures in Time did really well was she wrote on 2 levels. She wrote on a level for children, and she wrote on a level for adults, which The Simpsons sometimes does. Rocky and Bullwinkle used to do it all the time. It's not easy to do, but she was able to do it in this game. And you know, you can see Bill Davis's influence there. Jane Jensen and Gano Hayne did EcoQuest 1, The Search for Cetus, and you get a little hint of it, especially with that buxom fish up there. Bill even did his own sort of interactive storybook called Charlie and Slater Go Camping, and this is a screen from that. So you can see there were a lot of Sierra games that started to get this flavor. It was all because Bill Davis had an art sensibility and a real desire to create a cohesive look for Sierra games. Not everyone liked it, but it was good to have as a base. It was good to refer to and to kind of play off of. So there was Bill Davis, one of the great shapers of the Sierra Library. There's also a man I want to mention named Warren Schwader. Warren Schwader was a programmer, and of course the early programmers were also the designers. You didn't need artists when you were doing this kind of game. And the programmers were also the designers. But Warren did actually this game, Threshold, which I owned in the mid-'80s on a ColecoVision cartridge. But he went on to design, I would say, at least 8 or 9 of Sierra's other games, including the entire Hoyle's Book of Game series, and he was instrumental in Jones in the Fast Lane, that board game, in programming that, doing a lot of the writing on it, and he was at Sierra almost from the beginning. If you're interested in the very, very early days of Sierra, and it is a pretty interesting thing because when Sierra first started, it was very loosey-goosey. I don't know how many of you attended Al Lowe's talk just a few weeks ago, but I know he talked about Bikini Fridays. That's the kind of thing that the Sierra that I went to would never have been able to get away with. They were much more by the book, you know, observing all of the proper human resources laws and so on. But in the very early days, Sierra was a very different place. There were strippers, there were wild parties. I am not kidding. Now, fortunately, that has all been documented. There is a wonderful book called Hackers, Heroes of the Computer Revolution by Stephen Levy.
And one of the chapters of this book is devoted to Sierra Online. In fact, you can see Ken's name right up there, Steve Wozniak. So the whole chapter about Sierra and what a crazy, crazy place it was in those days. And if you're interested, it's must reading. There was also a huge lawsuit that almost broke the company at the time. Did Al talk about that? About the Jawbreaker lawsuit?
Yes.
They came. He did?
Yes, he did.
Jawbreaker was a game that kind of resembled Pac-Man, and Atari really didn't take very kindly to that. So there was a huge lawsuit, and of course Sierra was the little guy, and they almost closed up shop. Anyway, that's all detailed in Hackers. It's a good book to read. One other person I want to mention who was at Sierra for a long time and who influenced almost everything we came out with was Mark Siebert. Now, Mark Siebert was the music director, and although he didn't write a lot of the scores himself, he had a hand in it, and he influenced them, and he put his imprint on them. And then later on, he became a producer. In fact, I believe he's listed as producer on The Last King's Quest, Mask of Eternity. Sierra was sometimes a very, very difficult place to work because Oakhurst was such a small town. So what you had at Sierra were a lot of husband and wife teams. You had a lot of parents and children working there at the same time. You had cousins. There were some, it was very cozy, too cozy. It became a problem sometimes. In fact, there was a woman named Bridget McKenna who wrote on a lot of games, and her daughter Marty McKenna, both of them are still alive, and I feel almost compelled to mention that every time. So Marty and her mom Bridget, and Bridget's husband, who was Doug Herring, who was one of the main artists for Sierra. So it got very cozy sometimes, and it was like a pressure cooker. If you were having an argument with your husband or wife or your kid or whatever, well, you were going to see them at work the next morning, so you got to deal with it. And this all, of course, was all the way up the food chain. This gentleman's name is John Williams. That's Ken's brother. He was head of marketing. In fact, if any of you remember Interaction magazine, the newsletter that Sierra used to publish, John Williams also called himself Johnny Magpie. That's the way he looked in the magazine. And since he was head of marketing, he could decide what we were going to tell about games in development and what was going to remain secret. So, you know, we even had, Ken and Roberta, husband and wife, and then Roberta's brother-in-law. So you had these interactions all over the place. And what people did was, when the weekend came, unless you were in crunch mode on a game, you went to Yosemite, or you went to Fresno to go shopping. Fresno was 50 miles to the south, and that's the only place where they had something like a mall or a store. But if you went up north to Yosemite, you could hike, you could camp, and a lot of people used it to de-stress after a week of work at Sierra. Everyone went camping. I know Scott Murphy used to love to climb Half Dome. I think he still does when he's there, which is not often anymore. But then Sierra itself, not only Yosemite, but the company started to become a character in the Sierra games, which was kind of cool. For instance, in Space Quest, here are the two guys from Andromeda coming and meeting Ken Williams. This was the end of, I think it's Space Quest 2. Coming and meeting Ken. Or at the end of the original Leisure Suit Larry 1. If Larry died, he would fall down through a hole in the ground and come out into this factory where he would be recycled They would fit him with a new head. There he is talking to King Graham from King's Quest, and I don't know where that dragon is from. But Sierra started becoming its own, all this self-referential humor around the company. And that just kind of added to the mystique. People loved it. People, I think there was another game where I think it was another one of the Leisure Suit Larrys, where at the end of the game, you came back and you walked through all the sets from the other games. They had these big painted backdrops that looked like backdrops from Police Quest and backdrops from Conquest of Camelot, and you'd walk through them. It was so cool. And it even went so far as to influence the game I did with Al, Freddie Farkas Frontier Pharmacist. Freddie Farkas Frontier Pharmacist was set in the town of Coarsegold, an old mining town. And Coarsegold, in reality, was just down the road from Oakhurst. It was just a little bit bigger. There are a lot of people at the company that worked in Coarsegold, but Sierra Online kind of put it on the map, at least temporarily. So here we have some of the designers. That's Bill Skirvin again. He was an art director. He was the man who became famous for hiding phallic objects in Leisure Suit Larry screens, which is a great reputation to have. I mean, you want to be known as the guy who can hide the phalluses in the picture. Jim Walls, Roberta, Al Lowe, Warren Schwader, Laurie Cole. I don't know why Corey is not in this picture, but it's possibly because he really started off more as a programmer. And up there we have Scott and Mark, and in between them is Christy Marks, who did a wonderful game called Conquests of the Longbow. Now, this was the second in a series of games that were supposed to be a trilogy, a historical trilogy, and they only got as far as the second one. The first one was Conquest of Camelot, which I think, along with Lorabo 2, The Dagger of Amun-Ra, and the Gabriel Knight games, probably the games with the most literate, tight designs, well-developed stories, well-thought-out puzzles with clues, actual clues in them, almost of the quality that you would get from LucasArts. I can't believe I said that. Lorabo 2, The Dagger of Amun-Ra, designed by Bruce Balfour. Bruce Balfour designed a game for Interplay years before this one. It was called Neuromancer, based on the book by William Gibson. Fantastic game. And Lorabo 2 as well. A really well thought out, well plotted, sophisticated game with an art style that I think surpassed anything that Sierra had done up to that point. It was all based on the work of an artist named J.C. Leindecker, who was very influential in the United States in the art scene in the 1920s, which is, of course, when Lorabo 2 takes place. Now, I brought this as a video, but I don't think the videos are working, so you're not going to get to see it animated, but this is a screen from Lorabo 2, and that dancer up there, that is Jane Jensen rotoscoped. And you can find this on YouTube. Look up the Archaeologist song. You actually see Jane Jensen gyrating and dancing and looking pretty good while she does it. We also had some fantastic artwork on, I want to show Freddie Farkas. We had an artist named Ruben Puente, and Ruben went on to design and paint pogs. I don't know if pogs became popular here at all. They're like bottle caps, nicely decorated little bottle caps. That was some of the work that he did for Freddie Farkas. Scroll down here and see if I can find anything else about him, but I don't think so. So Freddie Farkas was the game that I did with Al Lowe, and on Freddie Farkas I tried to establish a niche for myself. See, I loved the old Infocom games. Those, to me, were the highest quality adventure games written up to that point. And the reason why is because they had a parser, and because they anticipated what you were going to try, and they gave you responses. They were very rich games with responses. You could try doing crazy things, and then you would find to your delight that the designer not only anticipated it, but came up with some kind of a wisecrack that would make it worthwhile. And you would get this terrific sense that you had read the designer's mind, and that the designer had read yours, and that you were actually kind of communicating with the designer. So I wrote a ton of responses for Freddie Farkas, thousands. Now, we only had the point-and-click interface at that point, but it was my thought that, well, if we've taken away all this interaction, I'm going to give it back to them by making sure that anything they try is not going to give them a generic message. What an insult to a player to give them a generic message. I mean, that's always been my attitude. It's like the designer is saying to the player, yeah, you're going to try that, but we didn't think it was worth, responding to. That's a lousy attitude. Now, there was a game from LucasArts that I kind of loved, Full Throttle. But talk about generic messages. Wasn't that the standard response during Full Throttle? Thought, wow, we can do better than that. So I wrote thousands of dialogue responses for Freddie Farkas, so many, in fact, that, when Freddie Farkas first came out, it did not sell very well. And that was not really a surprise, because SCI, it wasn't an SCI issue, we used to send out in our boxes these warranty cards. And we started asking, what genres of fiction would you be interested in seeing turned into an adventure game? And Westerns scored really low. So I don't know how we managed to do one. Bruce Balfour had proposed a comedy Western, and they had poo-pooed it, but then Al proposed it, and Al had enough of a track record with the Lowry games that Ken and Roberta said, all right, let's do a comedy Western. And so it initially didn't sell, and the company said, all right, we're not going to do a CD version, and we're not going to do a sequel. Well, we tried our best. But it picked up speed. And after about a year, maybe a year and a half, they had sold enough copies where they said, we should at least be doing a CD version of this. Now, I was working on Space Quest 6 by then, so they sent Al to Los Angeles to record the dialogue and text for Freddie Farkas and give it speech as an afterthought. And he got so sick of sitting in the studio recording these voices, because I had written so much, that he called me one day and he said, Josh, we're cutting some of the text. Oh, God, put a dagger through my heart. I said, well, first of all, I didn't even know that they were doing a CD version. They didn't even tell me about it. So that was one kind of ugly surprise, that they were doing one, but I wasn't working on it. But the other ugly surprise was that they were going to cut all this text, and I said, well, Al, there are hints and clues in that text that you've cut, and some of these puzzles are going to be impossible now with no clues. And he said, okay. So how we eventually shook it out was that we left the text in, but about 15% of it has no voice, which is not an ideal solution, but it worked for us. We did a lot of wonderful, groundbreaking things with Freddie Farkas, though, even though it wasn't an A-list title. For instance, the programmers came up with a way to synchronize a bouncing ball. We had a ballad at the beginning with a bouncing ball. And they had to work really hard to get that bouncing ball to synchronize with the Sound Blaster music and the ad-lib music. But they managed. Freddie had a workbench in his pharmacy where you had to actually concoct prescriptions. And it had like at least 24 moving objects that you could take off the shelf and put down in your workspace and move around, and that was giving us memory problems all over the place. And it was right up until the last minute that they were working on that, trying to get SCI to handle it. And we also did one of the most marvelous pieces of artwork, I think, in Sierra history, which was the main street, which was supposed to be the main street of the town of Coarsegold. It was, when Bob Gleason, the lead artist, finished painting it, it was 7 feet long. I have that piece of artwork framed in my home. I will never give it up, no matter how much you offer me for it. I encourage you to make offers, because it takes up a lot of space, and I have no place on the wall to hang it. But of course, I would never get rid of it. So Sierra had been ramping up as I came on board, and there was a tremendous amount of development, and they realized that there was no way that Roberta, Scott, Mark, Christy, Al, and Jim were going to be able to handle it. So they came up with something called the Sierra Star System. They didn't call it the Sierra Star System. That was a name that we coined afterwards. But it was how they decided to keep the company going. And here's the way the Sierra Star System worked. You would take a name designer, and the name designers like Al and Roberta, they were so popular that they were now brands in and of themselves. You could just put their name on a game and it would sell. So this was the idea. You get an up-and-coming designer. Am I running short on time? I don't know. I have no idea how long I'm speaking. 10 minutes? Okay, well. Right, I know. So they would take one of us up-and-coming designers, and we would do the lion's share of the work on a game, but the name designer's name would go front and center on the box and in the marketing. And in that way, they could train us as designers, but not have to worry about losing sales, because whichever designer was sort of mentoring the young designer, that's the person who they would promote. For instance, on Space Quest 6, you can't really see it, but Roberta Williams' name on the top. King's Quest 6 was mostly Jane Jensen's work. Freddie Farkas was mostly my work. Dagger of Amun-Ra was mostly Bruce Balfour's work. That also had Roberta's name on it, and it worked. I mean, it was a good, decent plan, but it also made for a lot of hurt feelings and a lot of contention, because to some extent we started to resent the fact that these games went over great. The ones done with the mentors under the Star System, they did great. Freddie Farkas got great reviews. In fact, I was a little bit galled, frankly, when Newsweek reviewed Freddie Farkas and said, Al Lowe has found his truest voice yet. And King's Quest VI is thought to be the best of the King's Quest games. I think it is. And Laura Boat 2 is an absolutely wonderful game. So the Star System worked, but there were a lot of us going, this is maybe not as fair as it could be. And so once we had done one of these games for the designers, we were able to go on and do our own games. For instance, Jane, of course, did Gabriel Knight, which, you know, there's nothing to say about it. Bruce Balfour, who had done Laura Boat 2, went on to do Outpost, which wasn't an adventure game at all. Boy, there's so much more I could talk. I could tell you stories. Obviously, I have apparently been bending your ear for way too long with the reminiscence of this old man. But at this point, I think what I better do is turn it over to questions, because hopefully some of you have some for me. I would be happy to take them before I talk, before I say another word. Thank you.
I wanted to talk about, but that's okay. Any questions? Yes.
Hi, Josh.
Hi.
Thanks a lot for the talk and for all your work. It's been amazing to have you here, so thanks a lot.
It is my pleasure.
I want to ask you about genres that you mentioned it, because I think one of the main things that gave Sierra its identity was the whole huge amount of genres that you guys tried to base your games around, which was similar to Infocom's approach, I believe. So I want to ask you if that came, as it usually does, accidentally, or was it a conscious decision to try to widen the amount of genres that you would work around?
Initially, I think it was Ken's idea. I mean, I think that's why he got Jim Walls to do the Police Quest series, because, you know, they've done a space adventure. So there was always an acknowledgement there that they needed a variety of genres, and they wanted a variety of genres. The idea to start asking people what genres they might be interested came from those of us in what we call the writer's block, which was Bruce Balfour and Jane Jensen and myself and Gaino Hain and some of the others. We were like, they wanted proposals from us. Every week we would submit a minimum of 2 proposals for new games, and we started going, all right, there's got to be something else here than science fiction, fantasy, and, you know, detective stuff. And when Jane, for instance, wanted to do Gabriel Knight, that was a tough sell for her, because if there's one thing the company did not want to do, it was horror. They felt they had a very Disney feel to them, and they didn't want to disturb that. But it worked out very well with Gabriel Knight, and then there was Phantasmagoria, and, you know, they could no longer say we don't want to do horror. They were devoting a lot of the company to it.
Great. Thank you.
Sure, my pleasure. Any other questions?
Hello, sorry.
Hello?
Here.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
In the dark. I wanted to ask you, how do you feel with the games from nowadays, from back to for your games, the Zero Online? We all grew up with your games, and at least me, I feel a little bit nostalgic about that. I don't see the magic that Zero Online had in the games in nowadays games. I don't know if I made my point with my English.
No, I understood every word you said. I tend to agree with you. There is no longer a company that you can rely on for great quality adventures. None of them that feel as loose and like family. Sierra games always kind of felt like family. That one game series would refer to another game series. We'd talk about designers and Yosemite and all that. I mean, there was a very casual, gentle feel to the whole thing. The games today, frankly, I find them very imaginative, but I miss the interaction. I would much rather see the parcel come back somehow. I wish there was a publisher brave enough to take on a game with a parser, because nowadays with you know, a really robust parser, you could eliminate all the hunt the verb problems that were a hassle in the first place. People are used to typing now that they're texting all the time. I think the time might be right for it, and I always miss that when I play today's games. I hate point and click. Sorry for whoever I've offended by saying that.
Hello, I wanted to make a question, but it's probably something maybe someone like you can only answer. In the times, I play pretty much everything that you have made back in the day, so I am a fan, so it's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you.
Also, well, I want to ask you, I used to play all the games in the 80s and 90s and followed everything, and it's like, I felt like video games like kind of started ignoring everything related to telling stories at some point after this. And this is something that is only happening only the games now in the last years are starting to put emphasis in telling story again. Maybe too much, like you say, for example, games like Uncharted or anything focus too much on the telling the story and not so much on the gameplay. But my question is, what happened with the industry? Did people stop caring about the telling stories at some point that this game stopped being made?
I think what happened was that publishers said adventure games have very low replayability factor. You tell a story and then that story's been told. Who's going to play the game a second time or a third time? It's almost cheaper and a better investment to make other genres of games. I mean, even Sierra abandoned storytelling somewhere along the way, late in its history. No, I think it was just publishers. I don't think designers ever stopped caring about telling stories. I think it's publishers.
Hi, over here?
Yes.
I think I'm going to have pretty much the same response that the last question, but I feel a bit something that has disappeared a bit is also funny games. Games that care a lot about the sense of humor. Do you think anything happened that also made them disappear, or this also shows how the market evolved?
I think funny games are very difficult. It's much like Hollywood. In Hollywood, they have often noticed that the comedies never win the big awards. It's always serious drama that wins the big awards. And I think there's a lot of pressure on developers to take the easy way out, and that is to not try to do comedy. I mean, people say something about comedy and death. I guess death is easier than comedy or something like that. Well, then maybe the wrong person is trying to do the comedy or something. It's just very difficult. And I think avoiding that whole genre is a way for publishers to play it safe and also try to get their work taken seriously, because people tend not to take the comedies very seriously. They're seen more as disposable for some reason, but it's that way in other media too, not just games. It's also in TV and movies. They just don't take the comedies too seriously, and so with development costs going up and up, you want what you consider to be real bang for your buck, and the best way to do that is with a dystopian game set in a post-apocalyptic universe, where the world is beset by shambling zombies and detectives. Anything else? Maybe, I got applause on that note. I should go out. Actually, comedy dictates that I end with a song, but I'm not going there.
Hi, Josh.
Hi.
First of all, I cannot express how grateful I feel that I had the opportunity to speak with you. The influence that Sierra Line had on me was life-changing. Even the language I'm speaking right now is because of Sierra. So,
well, the same back at you. Yeah.
Well, I want to know your opinion about the legacy that Sierra left. What is going to be?
I think this is all evidence of Sierra's legacy. What could be better than this? My God, there is a rose-colored glasses factor that you often see, especially now with the remakes, when people are discussing things like Leisure Suit Larry Reloaded and the Gabriel Knight remake. People tend to remember the original as better than maybe it really was. They remember the parser as more robust and the puzzles as making a little bit more sense. Thank God. That's great. I got no problem with that at all. Except when people talk trash about the remakes and say, look at how wonderful the originals were. And I think to myself, no, they don't remember. They don't remember. They don't remember Codename Iceman. No. The legacy is fantastic. I mean, even in those days, we got mail every day from people who said, I learned to speak English because of you. My child has now a successful career in computer gaming because of you. You know, I think Sierra's legacy will only continue to grow as long as there are groups like this that have a renewed passion and energy to create wonderful storytelling games. And as long as you guys remember Sierra, then that influence, that legacy is still alive. And that's really, really heartening. It's really great to see. I had no idea that there was this kind of interest in adventure games in Argentina, of all places. I wasn't aware of it. I was ignorant, I confess. But it's so inspiring to see. So I have no worries at all about Sierra's legacy. I know that Ken and Roberta will always be gods in the industry, as well they should. Oh, God, I'm all verklempt. I promised myself I wouldn't cry. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for your hospitality.